Hey, thanks for dropping in. Welcome to the news. New restrictions have been placed on the sale and consumption of beer in Babylon. The laws available for all to read who can read are part of the code of King Hammurabi, handed down to him by the gods themselves. Included in the regulations are 20 different varieties of beer. The barleys, the wheats, the thin, the red and the black beers, the mixes, the aged exports, and especially the prized emmer. Because these laws have come down from the heavens, most punishments are rather severe, so it's highly recommended that you have them read to you. One example is the ban on political debates in drinking establishments, and the footnote that any alewife who tolerates such speech is to be put to death. On a more positive note, those who practice the honorable profession of brewer are still exempt from military service. A special event is scheduled for tomorrow in downtown Rome at the Forum Boarium, organized by Consul Decimus Junius Brutus Scavia. It's called a gladiatorial combat and will pitch several pairs of well-armed slaves in a series of fights to the death. Put on to honor his deceased father, Brutus Pera, this gladiatorial spectacle is new to these parts, coming from the Campanians' funeral traditions that require the spilling of blood for deceased nobility. Sounds like it will be a very entertaining and exciting event, and a good time is guaranteed for all. Barely 20 years old, the settlement of Londinium in Britannia has been burnt to the ground. A rebel force of perhaps 100,000 Celtic warriors, led by their queen Boudica, swept through the city, massacring as many as 20,000 of the inhabitants who had not fled. In their wake lies the devastation of Camulodunum and the defeat of the 9th Legion. Ahead, the future of Rome's presence on these isles could be at stake. And in many eyes, the actions of Governor Suetonius Paulinus are being viewed as catalysts of the uprising. Distinguished but ambitious, it was under his leadership that the Druids' sacred Isle of Mona was overrun, and that destruction of their religious groves dedicated to superstitious and barbarous rites is still fresh in the Britons' minds. Although greatly outnumbered, the Roman forces do have the advantage of superior weaponry, discipline, and leadership, and they are currently regrouping in the countryside. Meanwhile, the rebel forces are said to be heading towards Verulamium, and residents there are being urged to evacuate the city. More news today in the strange case of the Green Children, discovered in the Suffolk village of Woolpit last year. The girl, now called Agnes, has learned to speak the local tongue and has completely lost her green color. Her younger brother, sadly, never recovered his health and has passed away. Agnes lives today in the service of the knight who took her in, one Sir Richard de Caen. Since her arrival, she has also learned to eat foods beside the green beans of the field, has been baptized, and has answered as many questions as she can about her circumstances. She remembers tending her father's flock in the fields with her brother when they heard a great sound of bells chiming. And following the sound, they somehow arrived here. She calls home the land of St. Martin's, and she describes it as a place where the sun never fully rises and where all things are green. And finally, a former surgeon and oculist, Chevalier Johann Taylor, has passed away. A self-proclaimed leader in the field of eye surgery, Taylor was once the preeminent eye specialist of royalty and the famous throughout Europe. Originally schooled at St. Thomas Hospital in London, he soon rose to the post of eye doctor to King George III. And with those credentials, he traveled from town to town across the continent, heralding each arrival with handbills, placards, speeches, and his motto, "He who gives sight, gives life." His surgeries, too, were most flamboyant. Many performed in the town square to large crowds. His success rate, however, was abysmal. And in most cases, before the bandages were removed, he was long gone. Two of his most famous, or infamous, surgeries were performed on Johann Sebastian Bach and George Frederick Handel. Bach passed away on July 28, 1750, from the unhappy consequences of his very unsuccessful eye operation. And in 1751, Handel was permanently blinded by his. Fittingly, perhaps, Taylor died in obscurity after spending the last several years of his life completely blind. And that is today's look at yesterday's headlines.